Welcome. Good morning. It's really so wonderful to be here, see all of your imagined smiling faces, as best as I can tell. Such a beautiful day. I don't know if you woke up to frost. I assume most people did. And talk about beautiful. We are living in such an incredible place, and being together here this morning is really a joy. My name is Barbara Bartlett, and it is so great to be here with you this morning. We extend a special welcome to people who are fairly new to the church and to visitors. It's wonderful to share our community with you. There's a book at the back of the church for guests to sign, and we'd love it if you are visitors here, if you would sign the book. As always, there's so many things going on in the church, and I hope that you've been able to read your order of service and are reading the weekly In Touch that comes out on Thursdays, because it's just full of things that you can participate in. Also, the new website is so terrific. If you haven't had a look at it, I suggest you do. It's beautiful. And a number of people in the congregation have really worked hard to put that together. Special things that I'd like to draw your attention to. As always, Anne, I don't know how many years you've done this, but Anne Winnia is spearheading once again the red flannel hash dash. In COVID times, it's a pickup dinner rather than the community dinner around the table. And she has some more of these flyers, which she would love to have distributed to farther places outside of Woodstock. So if you'd be able to see her after the service and take one, that would be really helpful to get the publicity out. She also would like some help with people to do some baking and contributions of groceries. So Anne is right in back of the church, and she'd be so happy to have you volunteer to help out with this great tradition. There are new sign-ups now at the entrance to the church, just to the right here, for you to sign up to bring altar decorations. Sherry did this beautiful piece and brought it today, and it's wonderful. People can share flowers or a piece of art or something that they'd like to put on the altar. So you can sign up for that there, as well as being a greeter or one of the people who will do contact tracing as you come in the church. So everyone is invited to help with that. You don't need any special skills. So we hope that you'll consider signing up. Also, Mary Flanton reminds me that the covenant groups will be starting soon, and the sign-up has extended to October 27th. Such a great way to explore your own spiritual connections and to become more closely connected to others in the community. So, Mary, would you like to say something? On the table? Okay, so there's a sign-up sheet if you would like to join a group or even to get information. People can talk to you, Mary. Okay, great. And apologies that the hearing devices are still not working, but apparently somebody is on it, so hopefully they'll be working soon. And this would be a good time, if your cell phone is not already turned off, if you could make sure that it is. Today we have the honor of having a guest reflector, Rob Schultz. Rob Schultz, his reflection is entitled, I find this intriguing, Flying the Blue Peter, What Are Boats Made For? I'm really looking forward to hearing your reflection. Just to tell you a little bit about Rob, he's currently the Leadership Upper Valley Manager and Director of Development at Vital Communities, which is in White River Junction. They are committed to bridging boundaries to create positive change in the Upper Valley and do amazing work. Rob's career spans decades of work improving people's lives in all places, not just the Upper Valley, but Indonesia, Minnesota, Texas, and New Mexico. He and his partner Diane have 4 grown daughters who they enjoy visiting with. And he wears different hats as a carpenter, a cellist, a gardener, and a wilderness traveler. Rob, we're really grateful that you're here today and look forward to your reflection. And as a special event today, he will, after the service, he's going to be holding a question and answering period where he'll talk about different kinds of social justice initiatives in the Upper Valley. So we'll gather right around this area in the church, and Rob will be here to tell you a little more about what he does and to answer questions. So thanks so much for doing that.
Good morning. Very honored. Thank you so much for having me here today. I've missed being here. Being in this chapel has been part of my at least twice a year ritual of singing in Thetford Chamber Singers, and so I really miss the good company and good song and great acoustics of this space. What I have to offer today really is in the spirit of being fellow travelers. These are very much thoughts in process, and a year that has been really difficult for me in some important ways, and I think do feed into the themes of the day. I will let you know in advance that some of this journey for me recently has involved quite a lot of loss, and so I'm sad about that. And as anybody that knows me knows, I run wet. So if I get a little weepy, it's okay. It's all right. When I got the sort of prompts for the reflection, what stood out for me was the phrase, weighing risks and taking some is a fundamental part of the human experience that can support growth. How do we recognize this and also create opportunities and joy in these complex times? So I like getting right to the punchline. The Blue Peter, in an age before cell phones and alarm clocks and all the other things that would go buzz when we're needed someplace, was a way that ships that were in harbor would signal to the people that needed to be on those ships that it was time to come to the boat now. They would sometimes emphasize them by shooting off a cannon, so you also had the sound. So they would literally run this flag up the mast, and it would fly. It was blue. It actually had a big white square in the center of it, and that's how you knew that it was time to come back to the boat, because the boat was about to sail. So flying the Blue Peter, for me, is something that I'm holding as it's time to sail. And that boats really are not made to be in harbors. They're made to venture out beyond the harbor, beyond the breakwater, and be in the open sea, having great adventures. That's the punchline. I have, as Mary noted, she said, you certainly have had your fingers in lots of pots, in her email to me when I sent her my bio. I've had a life that has involved a lot of adventure. It's involved a lot of taking of risks that most people would say, wow, that was risky, how'd you do that? My dad is with us today, and I'll say that some of those risks were with him. When he was actually younger than I am now, my dad and I traveled down the Rio Grande River in the Big Bend National Park of Santa Elena Canyon. The walls are about 1,300 feet high. At the base of it, the river flows through a channel that's about 50 feet wide. And on that trip, not only did we paddle through this canyon in a canoe, just the two of us, but we also descended a much smaller canyon called Joel's Canyon using technical climbing gear that I know how to use and have used for years, and I actually sent my father off a rappel over a boulder down on a free rappel that goes about 130 feet to a rock below. So we had some big adventures together. It was awesome. I also think about paddling adventures. I've discovered a complete joy in paddling canoes and kayaks, and I'm thinking right now about an adventure I had with my partner Diane. We were up in the La Vérendrye, it's a reserve faunique in Quebec, and we just had a spectacular week, and we were paddling back to where we were going to take our boats off the water, and our last day involved paddling straight up into this wind, and it was a howling wind, and so we had to sort of we'd had to dodge from behind this island where there was a little bit of a lee, and then we'd cross a really rough patch to another island where we could sort of rest and be in the lee, and then we'd cross another patch, and we kept on going. We were just exhausted at the end of the day. We literally fell out of our boats and had to camp right on this beach, not in a campsite, bivouac site. And the good news is that we were able to set a nice tent up, and we had a nap and some chocolate. It was very good. Later on, we came out, and what had happened in the night sky with all that wind was that the setting sun in the west was hitting the cumulonimbus clouds in the east, so that we had these dark scudding clouds here. We had these huge towering cumulonimbus clouds in the sky that still had lightning in them that was flashing, and it was lit by this setting sun. And behind those cumulonimbus clouds was the absolutely cloudless, starlit sky. So I'm thinking about adventures that I've had. And I guess I'd ask you to think about adventures that you've had for a moment. Take just a second and close your eyes, and I'd like you to think about an adventure that you had where there was some risk involved, where you were excited about it. Is there any smell that stands out for you? Is there a sound? Can you remember who you were with? Can you remember how your body actually felt in that moment? So, for me, risks and adventures and growth involve that kind of adventure. But this last year for me has involved needing to hold and being, in some ways, and I'll come back to this word later, compelled to hold the fact that along with the risks, there is the very real possibility in life, and indeed the certainty in life, of loss. That this is not all about that romantic version of sailing out of the harbor or heading off into the wilderness, heading off into our boats. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that loss, but let me tell you a story that'll let you know a little bit about what happens in my brain. It's a little dangerous, but let me tell you. When my elder daughter was born in the hospital in Alpine, Texas, we prepared, obviously, in many ways, her mom and I, for her birth, but we showed up at the hospital with an 8-page birth plan. I think that the hospital staff was so nervous about us showing up with Alex actually in labor that they were pretty nervous about the whole thing. We were very focused. We knew what we were about, and much of that actually happened. Her birth was long, but just wonderful. But I was so focused on that birth plan and being with Alex, and frankly, may she rest in peace, keeping her mother Jean farther away from us than closer. That I completely missed until I was actually walking down the hallway with Eleanor in my arms, looking into her amazingly old and delicious eyes, that this was the beginning of a really big adventure, that this is a long haul, that birth plan was like, whatever, next, right? So the key thing that I'll come back to is that I thought that sort of it was the planning of that adventurous moment that was the thing. I was not aware, and obviously I was her dad, not her mom. Her mom had been carrying her for months, right? But I was like, oh my gosh, this is now forever. This is going to be my life. This is great. I was excited, but I completely missed what the plan was about. And I thought that if we did it right, it would turn out okay. So, against the backdrop of the pandemic and whatever your politics, against the backdrop of the political polarization and intensity that's happening in our country right now, for me this year has also been a year of losing some people that were very, very close to me. A year ago in September, my mom died of Parkinson's disease. And her passing, especially the last couple months, was really difficult. She was really having a hard time. And I really am grateful to my dad for being her constant companion. And we were able to be, my brother and my family and his family and my dad, we were able to be, I think, a support to my mom in her final weeks. But her last year and a half were really challenging. In December, we found out that my sister-in-law, Deb, that her metastasized cancer and breast cancer and lung cancer had really reached a critical stage, and we needed to go out to Idaho and be with her and help her get into hospice, which was a very good decision. But in February, Deb also passed of lung failure, which was a very, very hard thing for her friends and family to watch, as she basically struggled to breathe. And then just this last August, my father-in-law also passed of pulmonary fibrosis. Again, a death that we were able to be there with him. Indeed, it was about as gentle as it could possibly be. But this year, these losses have added up for me to beginning to understand something that I think I had missed, which is that there's no amount of getting the hospice decisions right. There's no amount of pulling the family together in the best ways. There's no amount of, working with the nursing and hospice staff to make sure that the medication cycle is right, that keeps us away from the loss of somebody that we love, from their passing. It's not the birth plan. It's not the plan around somebody's passing. It's the loss. It's their moving on. And so I've basically been, my kids tease me about this, given the opportunity. They're like, another opportunity? Really? Do you mean the opportunity? An opportunity to embrace my losses. And not just the losses of Phyllis and Deb and Joe, but there's been divorce in my life, there's been job loss in my life, there's been family illness in my life. This year has created an opportunity to move past my denial of how these events have been painful, how I really feel about them, and how hard it is to, as I'm wrestling as an old white guy with sort of the loss of agency. I think that if I do things right, it's going to turn out okay, and I'm wrestling with that. One of the growth points for me has been a term that I heard recently called freedom from denial. Freedom from denial. And it's a term that is that I am hearing from a woman named Faith Spotted Eagle. She's a Yankton Sioux elder from South Dakota. She was very active in the Standing Rock protests. And she speaks about this freedom from denial as being the thing that coming to grips with the culture and settler colonial clash between European immigrants and indigenous peoples is a clash that requires of indigenous peoples taking the time to heal themselves and their communities. And she says that what she offers to people of European ancestry is it's an opportunity, as we look at this hard, to basically engage in a freedom from denial of how our arrival on this continent has affected both the planet itself and the communities lived here that were so rich and so depth. There were so many people here. They had so many different cultures. They had so much, such a rich population and such a rich culture. So she talks about this freedom from denial as being a key part of what we need to embrace in terms of our own healing. What I choose to embrace as my healing, as my own Rob Schultz adventure of loss and adventure, and also something we can embrace collectively as communities, to embrace this loss of this freedom from denial and really look at what's happening around us. And it's hard to do. I mean, we have so many ways of being protected from the experience of loss, from the experience of how our behavior is affecting the very planet that we live on, how we affect other people. And this freedom from denial, one of the ways that I've been internalizing that is that I have all kinds of protections around me and inside of me that have really been working overtime for most of my adult life. And so it's time to do something different than that protection. It's time to stand closer to the loss. It's time to stand closer to the vulnerability. And in some ways, those protectors are insulating me not only from connection with other people, right, but also from connection to my own best self. I am fortunately in this journey as I try to wrestle with this protection, denial, loss. What's my role in the world? I have some great partners. My partner Diane, my daughters Eleanor, Bergrin, Meryl, and Sophie. I also have a spiritual community in this loss process. I asked the Quaker meeting, of which I'm a member, for a pastoral care committee. And so I have been sitting with Hugh and Fritz and Barb and Betsy. And what they've done is they have, and I want to pull the words apart a little bit, they have encouraged me. They have enheartened me. Cœur is the French word for heart. They have encouraged me, and they have also compelled me. And the etymology of the word compel is to drive together, which I kind of like that. They've been driving me together. So literally the last time I met with my pastoral care committee, as we sat in worship and sharing together, thinking through loss, I literally felt like the people that I was meeting with on Zoom were literally holding me with love and encouragement and compelling me to sit longer right next to the losses. To basically sit just a little too close to that fire. To really feel what those losses meant to me. To try longer to sit in the presence of them and make meaning out of those losses. So, stand closer to the losses, stand less protected. I don't think I'm unprotected, but less protected and more vulnerable next to my own mistakes and the harms that I've created. To do better about apologizing without reservation, without holding back, and without caveat for the ways that I've injured those that I've loved. This is the part in which I I know that this works in my head, but again, stick with me for thoughts and process, because I'm going to zoom out. It's a rough transition to some thoughts that I've been having about social justice, because I think that this connecting of loss and protection and freedom from denial, I'd like to connect to a couple things. One is the difference between our circle of awareness and our circle of influence. Part of what we need to do in our world right now is we absolutely have to expand our circle of awareness. We have to be thinking about the experiences that are happening to other people on this planet. We have to think about public health in a way that we've never thought about public health. We have to, I believe, embrace and think through the systems of racism and patriarchy and classism that we walk in every day. It's the very air that we breathe. It's the very rivers that we swim in. But if we think too much, I'll speak for myself, I tend to want to really understand these. I want to read not just Isabel Wilkerson's The Warmth of Other Suns, but Cased and about 7 other books before I really embrace and understand and figure out what I need to do about the role I play in systemic racism and institutional racism in my community. And so that push to expand our circle of awareness without expanding our circle of influence can lead us to certain kinds of despair. We are agents of our own lives. And so for me, I'm working with this right now. I'm trying to figure it out. How can I keep learning things that I need to learn? Because they will inform me better as I am trying to be the best Rob that I can be. I want to learn more, but also some of that learning, that expansion of the circle of awareness needs to not block me from engaging my circle of influence. What action can I take today? Right? How can I actually feel that action more than just writing a check? And I'll tell you honestly, I've been driving past the North Chapel this week because I've been out on a covered home repair job site in the trailer park over on the west end of town, building a ramp for a young family that needs a ramp for a little 3-year-old girl that needs to be wheelchair bound. There's something about actually using my body to help somebody else that helps me feel much less despairing, much less powerless about those bigger things that I'm also trying to learn about. So how do we expand that circle of influence so that we are also, we are in right balance between our awareness and our influence? The other concept that I'm working with here is I've been thinking about the flywheel effect. And you all know what I'm talking about, so you don't need to worry about the term. But when there's something really heavy that has not been moving for a while and you need to move it, moving it the first inch is the hardest thing, right? And then if you can move it a little bit farther, or you can keep on going, or somebody puts their shoulder to the wheel as well, the flywheel can start to develop momentum. I was a social scientist. I cannot explain to you the physics of this. But you know that once a wheel starts to move and it moves faster, it gains momentum. I think that flywheel effect is where we need to be in relation to looking at systemic racism and what I call, and I'm happy to talk about it later, but what I call white supremacy culture. I'm looking a lot about patriarchy because I think that sexism is something that is the elephant in the room in terms of as we look at the systems that don't serve us and do harm to people. So how do we look at that flywheel effect, and how can we start to move the wheel? And if we get more people behind, how can we start to move that wheel and generate some momentum in the right way, in the right direction? And a lot of that has to do with very small micro corrections. That's where it starts. It starts with small things that we do, but it has to do with actually getting the flywheel moving in the right direction. So, what are those actions that we can take that increase our circle of influence, that start to move that flywheel? Somebody else that I've been reading lately is Resmaa Menakem. Resmaa Menakem wrote the book My Grandmother's Hands. He is a man of color who lives in Minneapolis, and he's been working with both white communities and black communities and what he calls blue communities. He's been doing a lot of work with police in Minneapolis and St. Paul around how they can hold their own experience of trauma and how they can begin to heal that trauma and eventually start to build community together. And he uses the word culture as a verb. And I really like that. And it feeds into this idea of small things that we can do immediately, and we can take steps right now that both reculture ourselves and also help reculture our communities, both small and large. He also talks about wanting to build a culture of belonging rather than othering. And I think that's really, and that's a fairly complicated thing that I'm just beginning to understand. But he has some things that he really encourages us to do, and these are things that I'm trying to do. And I'll bring us to a close. I'm working to develop and understand and meet and grow with elders. Who are the elders in my life? Who are the people that are leading? And many of them are younger than I am. Most of them are not men. Most of them are not white. And I need to really uplift those elders and listen to their stories and help pass their stories on. I'm trying to create and tell and pass on stories of resilience and compassion and transformation and joy and living in joy and finding joy. I'm trying to be very explicit and as consistent as I can be in engaging in micro corrections, micro interventions when there are microaggressions present in the room. How can we sit at the Thanksgiving table in our families and really look at and really hear each other and possibly hear that relative that does not believe what we're thinking and really has something and is saying something offensive, or something that's putting somebody down, or somebody that's just simply engaging in othering behavior? Are there micro interventions that I can do that can bring that, that can move that forward? I'm trying to do a better job of taking care of myself and others, and this is a body thing. I tend to spend a lot of time up in my head. How do I listen for my own stress? And how can I listen to my own feelings? And how can I do that in a way that helps me listen to other people's feelings and listen to their stress and listen for the old stories and the old patterns and try to do something different? So how do we take care of ourselves in the presence of that? And then the other piece is slow down. There's a book by Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow. He's a Nobel laureate in economics. And I need to I'm working to specifically doubt myself when I'm thinking fast. Fast thinking is almost always about our old stories. It's about reading something that we think is going on into the current situation. And so when I'm thinking fast and I'm making snap judgments, I'm probably engaging in white supremacy culture. I'm probably engaging in patriarchy. I'm probably engaged in class bias. So how can I slow my own thinking down so that I'm actually seeing the people that I'm in the room with? So I'm seeing the particulars of a given interaction. So I'm hearing somebody's voice not because of what I think they're about to say, but because of what they're actually saying. And then on the basis of that, do almost anything different. Do anything. But how do you break out of that space of being caught in the old reflexive fast thinking and slow down and not make assumptions about what's happening in the room? So I just want to zoom back out and talk about where we've been. We've been thinking about adventures. We've been thinking about risks. We've been thinking about growth. We've been thinking about flying that Blue Peter because ultimately it's time for the boats to leave the harbor. That's how I'm feeling right now. So while this year of loss has been hard, I actually am feeling more hopeful and more emotionally grounded than I think I've felt in a long time. And I know I have a long way to go. But this time to depart the harbor, the time to leave the old protections behind and to stand closer to things, feels ultimately a statement of hope. How can I be as free as I can be? Start the journey to be free, genuinely liberated from denial. How can I engage in encouragement of myself and compelling myself and the people around me? How can that be creating a culture of belonging rather than a culture of othering. And ultimately, some of this is just physical, and I need to just sort of tell you things I'm doing. I'm lighting fires, nice ones, wood campfires, all right? And standing a little closer to them. I'm going swimming when the water's a little too cold. I'm pushing myself a little bit harder, gently under the advice of a physician, when I'm exercising, right? I'm choosing some of that physical discomfort to remind myself that I can also choose some of the emotional discomfort that involves with being more vulnerable, being more open, being more ready to accept somebody else's space. And part of this has been, we had a memorial service and scattered my mom's ashes about a year after she passed. We were on the Connecticut River, which was great. It was a beautiful day. We scattered her ashes and rose petals into the Connecticut River. The Judd family, which is my mother's family, came and settled on the Connecticut River down in Pioneer Valley, not the Upper Valley, in the Northampton area in 1637. So there was a sense of connection to the Judds as we scattered her ashes into the river. But losing my mother was an incredibly painful process. And I spent most of this year really not feeling her passing. And around the scattering of her ashes, some things started to break loose in a way that was really wonderful and alive. And so I want to just share with you in closing something I wrote for her a year ago, but when I found it, writing these words, I found myself connecting to it much more emotionally, and it'll help bring her into the room. Phyllis Judd Schultz, thank you for starting me on my journey literally on a hot day in August 1962 in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Thanks for all the love and care and drive and ambition and fighting the good fight and getting into good trouble and showing me how to keep struggling with my internal demons and good cooking and great teaching and getting me to all those cello lessons on Saturday mornings and robbing Peter to pay Paul to get me to summer camp at Farm and Wilderness up the road and college and that rebuilt Volkswagen engine in West Memphis, Arkansas over Christmas weekend and the train ticket to join you in Boston, and being part of the team during Bergren's head injury in Indonesia and Eleanor's spinal fusion surgery, and staying with all the changes in our crazy blended and extended Reinhardt, Schultz, Keats, Frietz family. And thanks for cutting trail as a powerful woman in a generation that was expected to do everything: marriage, kids, work, house, cook, and be nice while doing it, in the face of systemic sexism and resistance to nursing by the medical industrial complex, and resistance to public health nursing by the clinical nursing crew, all for 67 cents on the dollar. Thank you for the gifts you offered your daughters and granddaughters and nieces, and your husband and your sons and your grandsons. And for the love of the prairie and big western sky and sunflowers and dahlias and more dahlias and chewing the meat off of a well-cooked T-bone steak and farmers markets and strong coffee and really, really grumpy cats. Go well. Because boats really are safer in the harbor, but that's not what boats are for.